The title of this mini lecture is The Great Depression, Part 1. So let's get into it. Um, the first term that we're going to talk about is just kind of the 1920s, or factors that contribute to why the Great Depression happens in the US. And you have a number of factors that are at play here. So part of this has to do with the way the lack of a social safety net, for the most part, existed. Part of it has to do with uh, the safety net that did exist in terms of how it was biased in certain ways, the gendered and racialized nature of it. Um, Part of it has to do with the declines in the agricultural economy that had occurred throughout the 1920s. So there's a host of factors. Part of it has to do with, yes, the speculative nature of the stock market at the time, buying stock on credit, this kind of thing. Part of it has to do with the post-World War I era and the payments and things with Versailles and all that stuff. There's a lot at play when the stock market crashes in late 1929. So again, the majority of Americans don't actually own stock, but what will happen in the aftermath of this decline in values in the stock market for any number of companies quickly and swiftly is that it will quite thoroughly and quickly reverberate through the economy. So again, the majority of Americans don't own stock, but if your bank that you have your money in is heavily invested in commercial loan operations and in stock values that now all plummet, your savings is gone. And there's no protection against all of that. And so then, your bank is going to go under. So the crash itself, again, has a number of effects. It leads to extremely high unemployment. That at its worst, by the time you get to about 1932, at its worst, you're looking at, quarter to a third of the country out of work. Some historians are now suggesting that if you look at underemployed as well, that you're looking at 50 to 60% of the country, of adults that are unemployed. So this is a pretty awful situation. All right, so the third term for us is Hoover and associationalism. So the president of the United States, elected in 1928, was Herbert Hoover. Hoover had made his money. He was first in the first graduating class at Stanford, made his money in international mining, is also quite actively involved in what's referred to as racial management theories of the time, so quite racist by our 21st century definitions. This is an individual, though, who was seen as, I'm going to quote individuals at the time, was seen as the, quote, master of calamities. So this was an individual who, by the time you get to World War I, is a quite important, philanthropist, is very involved in economic recovery, is seen as this sort of very sound figure, so that in the event of any issues, particularly economically, that Hoover would be able to handle anything. Well, the crash happens, and unemployment rises, and Hoover's kind of belief in what many, K through 12 textbooks will refer to as laissez-faire, kind of policies. Hoover believed in associational action. He believed that folks should do something, but that private industries essentially should be the ones that kind of handle many things. His view was that associations should be formed within private industries so that in the event of crises, they can kind of take care of themselves. The problem was, of course, that it was difficult to get many of these private industries and others to kind of sign on. So while Hoover's government does some, it is seen as having done very little. And what ends up happening is that in the immediate effect, by the 1930, 31, for many Americans, particularly those in the hardest hit areas, this is pretty awful. So there is hunger in America during this period, and something that the federal government is hard to admit to. This opposition then to Hoover, this opposition then, this idea that there needs to be more action does contribute to actions that are taken. So the spring of 1932, you have what is referred to as the Bonus March. So this is where many thousands of World War I veterans, and in some cases with their families, in March of 32 will show up in the nation's capital. A pension was supposed to be paid a bonus was supposed to be paid beginning in 1945. Well, they've now been struggling for a few years. And what ends up happening is Hoover calls out the military, and the military drives these starving veterans and their thousands of individuals from D.C. And the scenes are awful. And the interesting thing is that Hoover does get still the renomination, and the scenes of the Bonus March, though, are a pretty terrible reality of kind of what's going on in America at this time. So, thank you very much.